Today I do not have my customary mug of hot coffee or tea because it is absolutely roasting in the Netherlands right now. So if I start to look a little bit like glistening throughout this video, then I apologize in advance. I am just really doing the best I can. Trying to stay hydrated. Hi, I'm Andrea and welcome back to my channel where I talk a lot about bilingualism. You guys know this is a subject that I am very passionate about. For those of you who might be a little bit newer, I am a native English speaker and I'm also fluent in French, and I now have French nationality as well, so I'm a binational American French. And I also have been learning Spanish kind of off and on my entire life, so I'm definitely not fluent in Spanish. So this video will mostly be talking about English and French. Learning languages is not only one of my favorite hobbies, but it's also something that I really advocate for. I think everybody should learn at least one other language. Whether you have only one native language or you have 2 or 3 native languages, I think the experience of learning a foreign language to you is so valuable. It opens up new opportunities, new experiences, new appreciation and understanding of other cultures, but also it's just a really good mental exercise. Learning a language uses so many skills. It will help you in so many different aspects of your life and other skills maybe that you use for work or you use for other hobbies. I actually made an entire video about other hobbies that I have that I think have improved my language learning, but I could probably do a video the other way as well. Things that I think I've improved on and skills that I've improved on because of learning languages. I will link that video up here if you're curious to watch it. Overall, there are so many more advantages, I think, than disadvantages of knowing another language, learning another language, being multilingual. However, nothing is all in one basket or the other, and there are a few, let's say, disadvantages, more on the annoying side than the, substantive side, but they're still there. Being bilingual can be really annoying sometimes. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. So grab some water, or unless it's, cold where you are, and then maybe grab some hot coffee, and I'm very jealous of you, by the way. But grab something to drink, get comfy, and let's talk about 5 really annoying things about being bilingual. The first one is pretty simple, actually, and that's when you forget a word in the other language. However, when it's the most frustrating is when you forget a word in your native language. So in my case, being a native English speaker and knowing French, definitely not as a native language, even though I'm fluent, it can be the most annoying thing in the world when I'm speaking English with somebody, with my husband, for example, because he's a native French speaker, but we've always spoken English together, and that hasn't changed even now that I'm fluent in French. But I'll be speaking with him 100% English. It's not normal at all to speak French with him, but I'll hit a roadblock at one point and not be able to remember a very simple word in English. This has happened like 3 times that I can think of just in the past week, and it happens with other people as well who I only ever speak English to. Hi, Bingley. What you doing there, buddy? Anyway, this happens all the time. One of the most recent examples was when I was talking about a lot of traffic on the road, and I wanted to say a traffic jam. And for some reason I got all the way to traffic and then I couldn't think of the word jam. So I ended up saying a traffic bouchon. And now it's kind of become an inside joke, and now we say traffic bouchon all the time. But it's really ridiculous things like that. And it works, of course, if the person you're speaking to also speaks the other language, but it still feels very silly, and it's even more frustrating when you're speaking with someone who does not understand the other language. So you can throw in as many weird French words in your English as possible, or vice versa, but they're not gonna get it. It's also very frustrating when you're the person who's supposed to be the go between the languages. For example, when I was working in Paris, and I had that same job when I moved to New York, so I was still working remotely for that French company, and I was the only native English speaker on the team. So anytime they had a question about a translation, which almost always was from French into English, they would come to me, they would ask me in French, speaking French, because that was our language together, and they would ask me how to translate something, and it was the most frustrating thing in the world when me, the native speaker, the expert on the team who was here to help with questions like that sometimes, could not think of the word in English. Or maybe I could think of a sort of way of translating it, but I wasn't 100% sure if it wasn't just a little bit French sounding still, because I was just too close to it. I was thinking in French, the French made perfect sense to me that they were saying to me, and it was really hard to find the natural English way of expressing that, or even just a simple English word. The direct translation of something sometimes just seemed impossible. And it's such a weird thing. Like, you don't think that when you're learning a language. This never happened to me with Spanish because I've never been fluent in Spanish, so I never got to that point, I think, where I really struggled. It can happen, of course, even if you're monolingual. Sometimes you just forget a word for something even though you know it. But it's even more frustrating when you have a word for it, when your brain gives you something, you look at an object and you think a word and it makes perfect sense, but it's the wrong language. It's very annoying, and it can cause some very weird, funny, but kind of a little bit embarrassing situations as well around other people. The second thing is when you're not able to share certain things, like certain jokes, certain videos online, even books and films, when you're not able to share those things with half your circle, basically, with family, with really good friends who maybe only speak one of your languages. This happens a lot for me with social media. When I see a really funny meme or I see a really funny short and I want to share it with somebody, it reminds me of somebody in my life and I just think this is perfect. They would love this. And then it kind of hits me, they wouldn't understand it. It can also happen with books, with films, you know, even though these things often are translated, and there are some really amazing book translators, movie translators, and dubbers. Dubbers? Is that the word for that? People who dub films. There are some amazing translators in the world who have done some like beautiful work, but sometimes stuff just doesn't quite work in the other language, even with the best translation. Sometimes you just miss certain cultural elements or comedic timing. And then when it comes to like, you know, short videos online, it's just, even a meme, even, you know, just text, you can tell them what the translation is, but it doesn't always work. And that can be really frustrating. It's a small thing, but it's something that happens on maybe not a daily basis, but I would say probably a weekly or bi-weekly basis. I either can try and find an equivalent in the other language if it's a trend or something like that. This happened to me recently. There was a trend that I had only seen in French several times, and finally I saw an English version at one point, so I was able to send it to my sister because I thought she'd really like it. But it doesn't always work either. So even if you find something that, you know, mimics the same trend, sometimes it just doesn't have the same effect. And also sometimes there are certain like creators, online creators that I like, YouTubers, short video makers and stuff that I really just like their specific style. And I just have to know that I will never be able to share their stuff with certain people in my life because they don't understand that language. So seemingly innocuous and small thing, but it happens on a very regular basis. So it becomes a very frequent annoyance. The third thing is maybe a little bit more nuanced, but a lot of people will talk about having different personalities in different languages. And when you're bilingual, at one point you kind of realize that you'll never be able to share whoever you are in that other language with, again, half the people in your life. It's not like we're an entirely different person, of course, but we have slightly different personalities oftentimes in different languages, and we certainly have different ways of expressing ourselves. We leave different impressions with people in different languages, even if it's something as simple as our accent, be it the accent that we have in our second language or foreign language, or even the accent that we have in our native language. For example, all of my French-speaking friends who I only speak French with will never quite understand how my interaction with another American, another Midwesterner, although I don't really have a Midwestern accent, but I am from the Midwest, so culturally sometimes there's a connection there. How that might be different from if I speak with a British speaker. We have different impressions of each other because we have different native accents. And of course, adding the foreign accent when I'm speaking French, that will give a different impression. I will express myself differently. So people will have a slightly different image of me. For example, I think I'm a little bit maybe quieter in French. I'm certainly not as quirky, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I feel like I'm a little bit more silly in English. When you're in this position, when you're bilingual or multilingual, I think for me at least, there was this moment when it just kind of hit me. My family's never gonna understand that. And my English speaking friends are never gonna understand that. My French speaking friends will never quite understand who I am, how I am in my native language. And it's kind of a weird realization. And it can be a little bit annoying sometimes too when you think that person's never gonna see all sides of me, really. You might be thinking, of course, even taking languages out of the equation, you still do have slightly different personalities, slightly different ways of being yourself in different groups. When you're with your parents, you know, you might be a little bit different than when you're just with your sisters or just with your really good friend or just with your colleagues. That's a widely studied phenomenon, and as long as you're being genuine to yourself, that's perfectly normal to be, you know, slightly different in different groups. But it's a little bit different when you think that even if you wanted to show this other side of yourself to a certain person or a certain group of people, you can't. Because, you know, if I wanted to show my really good friends what I'm like with my colleagues or my colleagues what I'm like with my really good friends, technically you could do that. There's a feasibility. You can put those groups together as well and become probably some sort of blend of those, and everybody will be able to see that side of you. But when it's a different personality or a different like version of yourself, that seems really weird to say actually out loud, and you can't show it. So even if the person is standing there in the room with you, even if my parents are there and I'm talking with, you know, my in-laws in French, this happened recently, actually when my in-laws were able to visit us when we were living in New York, and we went upstate and my parents were able to join us and we were all in a room together, but my parents don't speak any French and my in-laws don't speak any English. So we were all in the room together, all being able to see each other interact in different ways, but only my husband and I were actually able to like access both sides of that conversation. There was actually a funny moment when I was talking with my parents and I was getting really animated about something. I don't remember what it was, but I was just really into the conversation. And they made a comment that they had never seen me like that before. And they were shocked to see me like that, just rattling away. And there was something about the way I was expressing myself, I guess, that my in-laws had never seen, because it was a way that I hadn't really expressed myself in French before. So it's really interesting, and it can be kind of annoying when you realize that there's always gonna be this other side to you. There's always gonna be this other half of your life. In my case, if you're multilingual, maybe it's like thirds and quarters, but there's always going to be a facet of your life that you're not going to be able to share with certain other people in your life, even if you wanted to. Number 4 is something that only applies for a fluent but not native language. So in my case, being a native English speaker and a fluent but not native French speaker, this is something that happens all the time. But it can be very annoying when you're with somebody who doesn't speak that language and oftentimes doesn't speak any other language. So there's someone who doesn't maybe 100% understand how bilingualism or multilingualism works in the brain. When you come across something in that other language, whether it's a song on the radio or someone makes a comment in a movie or a film that you're watching in that language, or you hear something in the street, and they just assume that you've understood it regardless of what it is or what the context is or how clear or not clear the words were, and they ask you what it is. And when you're not able to answer, sometimes they give you that look like, do you really speak that language? You can just see it in their face sometimes. There's a little moment of doubt, like, I thought you spoke French, so why didn't you understand that random garbled French that was in the background of that random series that we're watching? It's always with good intentions, of course, but it can be very annoying because even if they're not trying to question you, sometimes you can just kind of see it. It's like you feel like you have something to prove now because you haven't been able to understand it. Being fluent in a language does not necessarily mean that you are at native capacity. Some people can get there with a lot of time, with a lot of practice. I started learning French when I was in my early 20s, so it's not nearly as comfortable for me as English. Even though I'm fully fluent, there's still gaps in my vocabulary, and that's completely normal. In 10 years, there'll be fewer. I still won't be native proficiency probably, especially because I don't speak it in my day-to-day life. I speak it every day, at least a little bit, but I don't speak it at home, like with my husband. So I don't think it's ever gonna be to the same comfort level as a native language, no matter how fluent I am. And that doesn't take away from the fact that I'm fluent. And you know, a lot of you probably will be able to relate. Even if you're perfectly capable of living an entire day in that language, you have no problems, there still will be little gaps, there'll still be little things that maybe you don't understand quite as quickly as a native speaker. There will always be vocabulary, random slang, you know, languages change. Languages also have multiple versions in the past that if you grow up in that language, you probably will have read something from the 19th century or the 17th century before. So you might know these weird sort of older versions of that language. Slang that you hear day to day, that changes literally every single day on social media. So there's always something to learn. There will always be gaps for native speakers, but especially for non-native speakers. But when you're not a speaker of that language, especially if you aren't bilingual and you don't fully understand how that frustration works between the languages, sometimes it's not very convincing. Like sometimes I think people just kind of assume that a person who's bilingual just kind of flips a switch between the two or just has, I guess, equal access to both languages. And it's simply not the case. Even when you are perfectly fluent in a language, there's always going to be that tiny bit of difference between perfectly fluent and native. And it might only show itself once in a very great while for the most bilingual among us. There's just so many reasons why you might not understand every single instance of that language. And I think we can probably understand it on a factual level, even if you don't understand it from experience. But anecdotally, this has happened a few times with people, but you can just kind of see it. It's like, why didn't you understand that? That was French. You speak French, right? Not gonna lie, it can be a little bit damaging to your pride. Last but not least, the fifth thing that can be very annoying about being bilingual is when you just can't remember what language you heard something in, or read something in, or just gleaned something from. Sometimes it's media, like I said, with, you know, memes and online videos and things like that, and you've seen something, you've seen a trend or something, and you are not quite sure what language you've seen it in, so you might be talking with someone the next day and be like, oh yeah, I saw this video yesterday, it's going around, everyone's making these videos, and they're like, what? Like, I've not seen any of those, and then you maybe realize, oh yeah, that might be a trend that's just in French or just in English right now. Usually trends do cross over at one point, but it's happened a few times for me. Or I've shared something, you know, for example, on my social media, like shared a reel in my stories or something, then realize that that person, even if they looked at my share, didn't actually get what it was about. It can also happen if you have multilingual friend groups. So I often find myself in Franco-English sort of groups. And sometimes a lot of people usually actually can speak a little bit of both, but sometimes there will be people in the group who only speak English or only speak French, maybe other languages as well, but of these two particular languages that I'm talking about, you know, maybe they only speak one or the other. And, you know, I will oftentimes kind of find myself listening to two different conversations because there's multiple different conversations happening at the table. And sometimes something will be said in one language and not the other, and you just kind of absorb it, you understand it, and you move along. And then maybe later you're talking to one of your other friends who speaks only the other language. You might mention like, oh yeah, remember when so-and-so said that, or so-and-so brought this up the other day. And the other person looks at you like, what? I don't remember that. And then, you know, it dawns upon you that that maybe was only a conversation that was happening on the French side of the table, or only a conversation that was happening on the English side of the table. It's the weirdest phenomenon. I feel like it's something that I don't think I expected to happen, and it was only when it started happening more and more, only as I became more fluent as well. So if I take Spanish, for example, you know, before I spoke French fluently, because I learned Spanish before French, but I never got so comfortable in Spanish, and I still am not so comfortable in Spanish, that I feel that disconnect from the language itself. I'm always very aware that what I'm listening to, what I'm reading is in Spanish, even if I'm understanding it. I'm never so comfortable that I forget that it's Spanish. And I have gotten that way with French, which I think is also a real test of fluency. Once you start being able to engage in that language and live in that language and stop thinking about the fact that you are engaging with that language and living in that language, that is a part of fluency. And with that came this other phenomenon, which is that I don't always remember if something that I absorbed, you know, something that I heard or read or whatever, what language it actually was in. And it can be really annoying. So those are the 5 things that I personally find the most frustrating, the most annoying, the most irritating about being bilingual. They're all small things at the end of the day. There are way more advantages than disadvantages to being bilingual, being multilingual. I will always advocate for it, like I said, but come on, we have to just take a moment to talk about these annoying things because they do exist. So now I would love to hear from you. If you are multilingual, let me know how many native languages you have and how many fluent languages you have, first of all, and then let me know what are your personal frustrations with it. Are there any funny situations? If you have a funny story, bonus points for funny stories, you guys. I love funny, multilingual sort of stories. Let me know in the comments below. If you've made it this far, then I will assume that you hopefully have enjoyed this video, so let me know by clicking the thumbs up, of course leaving a comment, subscribing to my channel if you want to see more videos like this and the other things on my channel. You can check out some of my other videos. I have so many playlists about my international experiences and adventures, travel vlogs, but also just language learning and language funny, you know, content like this as well. So feel free to browse some of my videos and let me know what you want to see next. Thank you so much for watching. As always, stay hydrated, especially if you're in summertime right now like I am. And I will talk to you very soon in another video.